is his task at hand. He knows that he just has to go out there and start winning races again. He's done so in quite some time. A long old streak for Manu Gas off the top step of the podium. But yeah, as I said, he just now needs to go out there and start winning. As we see Senna Aegis on our screens, he'll have big expectations on his shoulders. Wasn't it a great couple of flyaway rounds in Indonesia and in Japan for the Australian, scoring just 5 points in that time, 4 points in fact. But Aegis obviously has a very good memory of this round 1 year ago. He was on the podium, and here is Aaron Canet. I mean, on Saturday of Indonesia, we were writing him off. I was sending you messages saying it's done. There's no way that he's coming back from 21st on the grid. And just such a rotten kind of couple of races where things just hadn't been going his way. Yeah, what time to pull out his first podium finish since Assen, first part of the season, that long ago, all the way back in June. Okay, it was a slightly fortunate podium in that he crossed the line in fourth and then was given third position when Manu Gonzalez was disqualified, but still it was a brilliant comeback ride. As you said at the top of the broadcast, brings him right back into championship contention, just 33 points now in arrears.
If he wins this weekend, he's well and truly in the mix once again. Given that he was only beaten on the final lap to win this Grand Prix last year, Fermin Aldeguer in that stunning final lap battle with Aaron Canet, which Aldeguer, MotoGP's newest winner of course, ultimately won. As far as Aaron Canet is concerned, he is fast running out of opportunities to gain points. Gain points, as Neil mentioned, rather fortuitously. He needs to go out there and start winning again. He needs to ultimately turn this only two key horse race into a three-way battle for the World Championship in the rounds that remain. A moment ago, you saw Alonso Lopez on your screens. Something of a circuit specialist in these parts. Winner of this Grand Prix despite a long lap penalty in 2022, and would have been on the podium here last year had he not crashed out of third place, which of course did open the door for the aforementioned Senna Aegis.
Didn't see Joe Roberts back in form last time out in Indonesia. It had been 5 races where Joe really hadn't showed anywhere close to his best after that Brno win, but 6th place in Indonesia was much more like it. I have to say, there's going to be big expectations on this rider's shoulders this weekend. Jake Dixon, was speaking to him yesterday, he still hasn't ruled himself out of the championship fight. 5th place overall. Dixon is adamant that if we have a couple of wet races between here and Valencia, we could tighten that 59-point deficit. And Manu Gonzalez right up still. There we know Oscar is an absolute weapon around these high-speed curves. Dixon goes well here as well, so we see the Brit take a win before he bows out this championship and moves across to Superbike next year.
Marcos Ramirez, who has plenty of food for thought at the moment. There have been one or two whispers in the paddock as to whether his place in an American racing team for next season is completely secure. We'll no doubt run, go through the weekend. But Marcos Ramirez, who did take one of his best qualifying results of the season here last year on his way to 10th place. Finished in the top 10 though for 7 Grand Prix since he finished 7th in Brno, which might have led to some of that speculation surrounding his future.
I wasn't looking in the best of spirits there, was he? Needs to give him a little elbow to remind him that practice is coming up here. Did have confirmation from the American racing team this morning saying that for the time being Ramirez will be on that bike next year. But yeah, there have been a lot of rumours of Benas's name being linked with that second seat in the American racing team garage. Look in the Dutchman, Colin Veyer, who has continued his decent recovery this season. It's 2 rounds in Indonesia and Japan, 2 top 10 finishes on the points for Colin. Gives the impression that he really has got his head around this Moto2 thing. The start to the year, looking to continue that here, as will this rider here. I could not believe it when I was doing my notes for this weekend. It is now 2 years since Tony Arbolino has won a Grand Prix, Lewis.
Won it here at Phillip Island in very different conditions to what we have at the moment, although give it half an hour, that might soon change. And we had the cold conditions, the heavy rain and the strong winds, which ultimately brought a halt to that Australian Grand Prix a couple of years ago, which, if anything, only reduced Tony Arbolino's likely margin of victory. He was way clear at the front of the race. Although that, of course, that Blue Crew Pramac Yamaha Boscoscuro squad did have something to celebrate in Indonesia a couple of weeks ago with Ethan Guevara taking second place. The session, as you can now see, with the green flag waving, is underway. If you're wondering why no one is out on the racetrack, that picture perhaps gives you a very good idea. It's neither dry nor wet.
Exactly. And, there's not really a great deal of sense in going out and risking it when conditions are so blustery and quite cold. Wait until it is fully dry, or at least I'm sure a lot of riders are thinking that. Celestino Vietti isn't added to be the first or one of the first to pit lane. It's almost inconceivable that we have these conditions. When we were driving into the track this morning just after 8 a.m. it was dark, it was blustery. It really looked like we were in for a pretty miserable day of weather down here in Phillip Island, and here we are 2 hours later. Guys, temperatures are picking up. It looks as though the track will be drying out for a lot. So, yeah, very standard conditions here. How things can change.
Yes, there are a few concerns about the forecast through the weekend. We're not expecting an awful lot of rain the later we get into the weekend. Although, again, the disclaimer of this is Phillip Island has to be thrown in. Perhaps the greatest concern later on into the weekend could be the winds. Mentioned a couple of years ago, that race won by Tony Arbolino, which was cut short by strong winds. There are potentially some forecasts which suggest we might have gusts of upwards of 70 kilometers an hour on Sunday afternoon, which, if we get those sort of conditions, it might well for some rejigging of the schedule. Certainly hope that isn't the case as we go through the weekend. Here's one rider just to draw your attention to, Diogo Moreira, who of course you're all well aware of. The rider who's just going around the outside of is Harrison Voigt, who we welcome back to Moto2 this weekend. He's partnering Ivan Ortola at the QJ Motor Frinza MSI squad this weekend. Of course, Unai Aradre has been the regular on that bike for the last 7 or 8 Grand Prix. He re-injured an old left wrist problem in a crash in the Grand Prix in Japan a couple of rounds ago, which he then rode through a little bit of pain in Indonesia. So he's going to miss the next 2 Grand Prix because he's got a European Moto2 Championship to try and win in the next month or so. So the MSI squad have given him the next couple of rounds off to rest that injury. Harrison Voigt making his 4th Moto2 start, which of course included a debut here 1 year ago.
Harrison was riding for the Precanos team, which is no longer existent in this category. Plenty of track knowledge. Thrown in at the deep end somewhat is Harrison, but capable rider. Aussie fans will have 2 home heroes to cheer to the degree as well. He's in Moto3. This will be fairly high after what's happened in the last couple of years. Joel Kelso obviously on the podium 2023 in the Moto3 class. Senna Aegis 1 year ago in Moto2. These riders have fairly high hopes of replicating those performances here this weekend. Just brought his name into the mix as well. See what Harrison can do. He can a little bit of home advantage into the reckoning, considering some of the conditions are less than ideal, and with those winds that Lewis was mentioning, it's going to be very, very interesting on Sunday.
You saw on screens there the least talked about title contender of our challenges in Moto2 at the moment. Partly perhaps because he's yet to win with Moto2, but if we are still talking about Aaron Canet and potentially even Jake Dixon as Moto2 championship contenders in the final 4 rounds, then we have to consider Barry Baltus 1-2, 10 points behind Canet, 43 of the World Championship lead, although only if he remains waiting for a first Moto2 victory when the season is concluded in Valencia in a month's time, not going to be the world champion. He's going to have to win 2, 3 or even all 4 of the remaining Grand Prix to catch Gonzalez from there. But while we have Diogo Moreira on screen there, let's talk about his victory. Of course, there's so much to talk about with Moreira, both in terms of what's happened very recently in the past, but of course what's coming up in the future for the Brazilian. But I have to say, for all of the incredible things Moreira has done this season, that was his most impressive victory to date in Moto2 in Indonesia. It looked through much, if not all of the weekend, prior to the last minute or so of Q2, that Gonzalez was by far and away the strongest rider through that weekend. His race rhythm on Friday looks leagues above anyone else in that Moto2 class. With seconds remaining of qualifying 2, Moreira pulled the pole position lap out of the bag, which bumps Gonzalez onto the second row of the grid, and under intense race-long pressure from Manu Gonzalez until around 3 laps to the end, was never more than around 1.25 seconds behind. Moreira did not blink.
Yeah, he really did not. It was not the first time that Moreira has kind of been out of the reckoning at the start of the weekend, even as Lewis said halfway through the weekend, not really been speaking of him as a race-winning contender. And then he pulls a performance like that on Sunday. It really was, brilliantly controlled race. And you wonder, Manu Gonzalez wasn't thinking of the championship. Maybe he was willing to take a couple of risks, could have caught the Brazilian, but certainly wasn't an expectation once Manu Gonzalez certainly got into second place that it was only a matter of time before he kind of reeled Moreira in. But as you said, the Brazilian just kept his head and kept his rhythm, and was just so impressive up until the checkered flag. What a bonus for him afterward. He was I think on the flight back to Europe whenever news came through of Manu Gonzalez's disqualification, so he was fairly late getting to know what happened. But when he was describing the effect that it had on him, he said, it doesn't really make any difference. I still just have to go out there and take things one day at a time, just focus on my results. The focus isn't on Manu or what's happening to him. I'm just trying to get the best result I can at the time I'm out there on track. And Moreira, well, third win of the year, 7th podium, and now right in championship contention in just his second year in the class. It's a really exceptional chance of taking that championship before he moves up into MotoGP.
What it especially changes in the 4 races that remain is that had it been a 29-point lead, had Gonzalez kept that second place in Indonesia, would have been able to just follow Diogo Moreira home the 4 remaining Grand Prix. 5-point gap between first and second, so even 4 victories might not have been enough for Moreira in the rounds that remain. That is no longer the case. It is now firmly in Diogo Moreira's hands. If he wins all 4 races that we have left this season, he will be the Moto2 World Champion by the time the dust settles in Valencia. When you look at the recent trend, Manu Gonzalez led Diogo Moreira by 60 points at the summer break after that Czech Grand Prix, which of course was the second in a back-to-back, which saw Moreira injure himself having come through from the back of the grid and then collided with David Alonso at the Saxon Ring. Was far from 100% with the pit lane start in Brno, scored no points there. Gonzalez finished third to open up that 60-point World Championship lead. Moreira has beaten Gonzalez in 5 of the 6 races since.
Gonzalez really needs to reverse that trend. I feel that he has been riding with the championship in mind in a couple of races, but can ill afford to do that in the 4 races that remain as Moreira hones in and gets ever closer, as Lewis mentioned, has whittled that deficit down in the championship little by little. And Gonzalez needs a response even before qualification was announced. I have to say, I had this feeling with Gonzalez so strong all weekend long in Indonesia, and it's not the first time that I come away from Sunday thinking maybe he didn't quite capitalize on that dominance that he showed. I mean, in free practice he was so far ahead of the rest. Looking at his rhythm in the free practice session on Friday afternoon, then the free practice 2 session on Saturday morning, it was fairly conclusive that Gonzalez was due in for victory. And talking about Indonesia, but think back to Japan, he was pole position, he was the favourite there. Obviously didn't get a great start, but pulled up at turn 1 and then had that contact with Celestino Vietti, which forced him to take a long lap penalty. To Austria were head and shoulders above the rest there, and okay, serious misfortune, but again, a great start, had a really bad first lap and was way back in the pack. And that was before he hit those technical issues which forced him to retire. Not just one occasion where Gonzalez hasn't quite maximised the potential that he's shown over the weekend. And really, as I was saying, can't really afford to do that anymore.
It's funny, isn't it? Because of the rider managing a fairly healthy World Championship lead until the disqualification in Indonesia. Say he'd done a fairly halfway decent job. Look at his results since that victory in Mugello. 3rd, 4th, 3rd, a DNF which was not his fault in Austria. 3rd, 4th, 6th, 5th, and then of course what would have been 2nd in Indonesia. Consistent top 6 points finishes, which is the way you win World Championships. But ultimately with the disqualification, which was nothing to do with Manu Gonzalez, very much put a different shine on those results. And as you say, results where Manu Gonzalez did limit damage, but perhaps could have, fair assessment to say that Manu Gonzalez could have closed out this Moto2 World Championship by now, and he maximised some of those opportunities. Of course, Hungary, he was leading going onto the final lap, got beaten up by David Alonso and Diogo Moreira on the final lap of that race too. Of course, Misano, he had the physical problems with his shoulder that didn't exactly help him on that occasion as well. So there's no question that Manu Gonzalez has done a very good job of defending and protecting that World Championship lead. No question that he could have put this out of sight by now, even allowing for the disqualification.
Yeah, I agree with that. You say it's good form that he's been in. It's been consistent, and sure, that is without question. But is it really championship form?
Good but not great.
Yeah, it's good but not great. Since Mugello, after we left the Italian Grand Prix, he scored 3 podiums from the last 9. Exactly classify that as dominant championship form, where you're properly asserting yourself on the opposition. So maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on Gonzalez. He is more or less been doing what he's had to do. And he has had some bad fortune. I mean, having his radiator punctured in Austria, I mean, that's just something that happens once in a blue moon. And then obviously with the disqualification in last time out, couldn't really point the finger at blaming him on that occasion. So he has had some bad fortune, there's no question about that, but still I feel that maybe a couple of races where he'll be looking back on and thinking, I should have taken more points in that particular day.
The results perhaps haven't looked too bad when you position them against Aaron Canet and the issues that he's been having recently. Clearly Canet is not the likeliest threat now to Manuel Gonzalez. It's clearly Diogo Moreira, 9 points further back. In the last 5 Grand Prix, Aaron Canet has scored 36 points. Gonzalez has scored 50. Diogo Moreira has scored 76 and is the top point scorer in the last 5 Grand Prix after Dani Holgado's crash out of 2nd place in Indonesia. And of course it's a factor that we have to throw into the World Championship mix now in the final 4 rounds that remain. There's so many other riders you can get in amongst the World Championship contenders and split them up and potentially lead to big point swings in the rounds that we have remaining, with Ethan Guevara's 2nd place in Indonesia last time out, which did of course split Moreira and Canet in the end of that Grand Prix. 16 different riders now still on the podium in Moto2 this season. We're not far off the record of last season. I think we ended the year with 19 in the end, but we've got Guevara, as he demonstrated last time out in Indonesia, could get in amongst it. We have some wet weather. Maybe Tony Arbolino can do the same on the second of the Blue Crew, Pramac Fosca-Scoros. Dick Dixon, we've discussed the Aspar duo of David Alonso and Daniel Holgado. Celestino Vietti, of course, for the Speed RS Fosca-Scoro. There are so many riders in Moto2, as competitive as it is, that can make the World Championship contenders' lives very difficult in these final 4 rounds.
Yeah, and can turn a bad day from 3rd place into potentially a 6th or 7th place, which could be enough to reverse the deficit in the championship, which Diogo Moreira currently has. Moreira has done 1 lap and then pulled straight back in. So Jake Dixon's on slick front and slick rear just there. That is the case as he comes around to Lucky Heights. So be an exploratory couple of laps here for the number 96. And then he'll gradually get up to speed. Yeah, I think that we are 15 minutes into this session. We're already on slick tires. I have to say that is something of a surprise. If you were here more than an hour ago, good odds on that happening, but here we are. Look at Yumi Sasaki. He's had a couple of decent races as the Japanese rider.
I'm going to look at Marcus Ramirez as he came through the victory, see what tyres he's on, given the sector times he's currently setting. He and Mario Aggi, one suspect, are out there on slicks at the moment. You can see that Alex Escridge is 2. He'll be serving a long lap penalty here this weekend for causing a crash during the Indonesian Grand Prix. The end of that first lap when he was in the battle for the points, which though in the end scoring nothing. It was Marcus Ramirez that he took out on that very first lap. Ramirez, who's coming towards the final corner now. Let's have a look at what Screech has been up to. This is through the Miller corner of turn 4. See the dry tyres and still a little bit of water being kicked up as Screech being a little bit tentative and a little bit cautious there as he keeps a very close eye on some damp patches with a little bit of smoke trailing out of the exhaust of his Triumph powered forward machine. Straight to pit lane as a result, with already some water on the track. We don't want to add any oil to it either.
Yeah. More than just a bit of smoke coming out of that exhaust as he came back down into pit lane. So it's not dropping anything. If it's coming out of the exhaust, well, it's crossed. All is okay. Of course, saw that from Pecco Bagnaia during the MotoGP race back in Japan, and he was okay to continue and finish the race despite some of his concerns from Berta officials. A real problem spot in Moto3 today, coming out of turn number 4, Miller corner, unknown. or technicians or not what is going on with Escridge's machine.
Where you won't lose too much by having those kind of issues. This is the one with other mixed conditions. As mentioned, the times where they are coming down now with the slicks thrown in for Adji, for Dixon and for Ramirez. 139.9 is Adji's current benchmark. With the Indonesian now, that's going to drop by a good second or so on this lap. Fastest ever Moto2 lap around here, so the kind of times you should expect in the dry. Aaron Canet last year in the race at a 1:30.816, the fastest ever Moto2 lap. So we are now 7.5 seconds away from that with Marcos Ramirez, who's down to a 38.2. Mario Adji won't be too far away from that himself. He's also into the 1:38.
These times are just going to continue dropping throughout this session. Adji was in hot into turn number 1 there, but thankfully manages to keep it more or less online. The reflection from the sun, that there are still plenty of damp patches going in there, and Phillip Salac, understandably, is deciding to wait it out. He had a miserable time, didn't he? In Indonesia, did the Czech rider. Fortunate from some consistent transmission issues in the race. It was very difficult for him to change down through the gears into the penultimate turn on the Pertamina Mandalika circuit 2 weeks ago. And eventually, it got so bad that he just thought that he can run off track, and he was quite a few technical issues through the weekend with his engine braking not being quite right. Phillip, after a while, just said, you know what, this is more danger than it's really worth. So to retire out, really not quite helpful whenever he is riding for his future, essentially, in this class. Salac's plans for 2026 still unknown. Maybe 1, 2 options on the table, but so as the weeks go by, when that's slightly more precarious. So Salac finds his spot on the grid for next year.
It appears as if the RW squad potentially where one of those vacancies still lies for next season. Saki looking secure within that team. Brandon Goldberg's place, though, seemingly appears to be up for grabs. We look forward to next season. Ramirez now down to a 1:36.3, and the gloves are going back on for Diogo Moreira. He now looks set to a full part in this pre-practice 1 session. And of course, we've discussed the World Championship battle that Diogo Moreira is a full part of, but of course, it has also been announced. The news that I think we've all known unofficially for a couple of months now. Diogo Moreira is going up to MotoGP next season with the LCR Honda team, partnering Johan Zarco at that squad for next season. And hey, has come in just a couple of years, just his second season.
It's been a pretty rapid rise, hasn't it, through the junior classes. 2 years in Moto3, maybe didn't quite achieve what we were expecting him to in the junior category. Then 2 seasons in Moto2, and very highly thought of. I was speaking to him yesterday. He did have an offer from Yamaha on the table, where they believe to step up with Pramac in 2026. And Honda have given him a 3-year contract. And he was saying yesterday that it's quite nice, because obviously next year, stepping into the final year of the current technical regulations, and then going across to new 850 machines in 2027, it's just to give him a little bit of leeway, space to put himself up to speed in next year, but then in 2027 as well. But people will know as well as anyone that if the results aren't up to standards, then be absolutely sure of your spot on the Premier Class grid. I have to say how he's it's the speed with which he's adapted to Moto2. Said Rookie of the Year last year, which was quite a decent achievement, and then just how he's become a championship contender in his second year. I mean, that does indicate that he is very, very talented indeed. I do wonder, would he maybe have benefited from a further year in Moto2, just because he's had, what, 3 wins this year, but none of them have been really dominant, have they? He's not had a proper dominant weekend, the likes of which we've seen from Ana Gonzalez on a couple of occasions in 2025. They're always being kind of like last-minute sort of saviours. Like he kind of pole position from nowhere on Saturday, and then everyone's surprised to see him take the win on Sunday on the 3 occasions that he's done it. Maybe step up. You kind of need to show that you're capable of dominating rounds before you do that. But then another part of me thinks, well, you're good enough. Go up when you can, and maybe if you're stepping up as world champion, who cares if you haven't dominated those weekends?
Yeah, and I think to Phillip who of course is now MotoGP winner of the Indonesian Grand Prix. Last time out, there was a lot of talk, given his issues in Moto2 last year, whether perhaps Ducati had jumped the gun by signing Aldeguer as early as they had. They signed him when he was having that pivotal patch late in 2023. If you think the rider's good enough, sign him up, because as Diogo Moreira has pretty much made public knowledge himself, if Honda didn't sign him, Yamaha were going to. So I guess it was ultimately a risk and a punt, if you want to term it that Honda felt was very much worth taking. In terms of winning MotoGP, the best way for Diogo Moreira to do that is to just get on a MotoGP bike at the earliest possible opportunity. He will ride a MotoGP bike for the very first time on the Tuesday after the Valencia Grand Prix, with the winter schedule now officially confirmed. Of course, Diogo Moreira will not only have that day of testing in Valencia, he'll have the shakedown test and the official pre-season test in Sepang before we go testing at Buriram the weekend before the opening Grand Prix of next season, which is on the 27th, 28th and 1st of March.
Yeah, Moreira is a rider. We've mentioned this a few times this year and last. Incredible flat track rider, incredible supermoto rider as well. Even some of the current MotoGP stars, when they ride with him on flat track or on supermoto, think this guy's got something extra than me. And he rides regularly with the likes of Marc Marquez. He was saying, asking Mark when he was weighing up his decision for next year on which factory he should choose. Mark's advice was very, very useful. And you'd have to say, with the current trajectories of the 2 Japanese factories in the Premier class, Honda and Yamaha, if you're looking at the last couple of rounds, it's a pretty clear decision which one is, I think, a surer bet 2026 to be more competitive. Obviously, Yamaha times ahead for them next year. They'll more than likely be racing their new V4 M1. It's going to take quite some time to get up to speed, you would imagine, whereas Honda, there is an argument to be made that Honda is maybe the 3rd best bike in the grid now in MotoGP on its day.
Certainly proven that they've got a bike on its stage, say, that can fight for podiums. Driving proven that in Motegi. Of course, they did win the Grand Prix with John Zarco, albeit in the wet earlier on in the year. Although Zarco took a 2nd place at Silverstone shortly afterwards. Progress has been noticeable, and what has been noticeable with Honda in recent Grand Prix is that every performance enhancement they put on the bike, every new part that they put on the bike, it has brought the desired effect. Portolara in recent times, only the lack of new parts from a Yamaha point of view to drive them forward up the grid. Now take a look at certainly the likeliest home favourite this weekend for the Australian fans in Moto2. Of course, 2 riders with Senna Agius joined by Harrison Voigt. But Agius, podium finisher a year ago, and of course, since he last rode on home soil, has become a Moto2 Grand Prix winner in such dramatic fashion on the last lap of the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Agius now down to a 1:33.408. He's a quarter of a second clear of Tony Arbolino.
I said earlier on, Agius had a couple of difficult runs over in Asia and Japan weekend there, and then race in Indonesia got off to a pretty bad start. He qualified down in 22nd, didn't manage to get out of Q1 on the Saturday, and then he was handed 1 lap penalty after some contact with another rider. Recovered from 12th, he was more or less at the back of the field for that long lap. And when he was on his way to 12th, he was showing probably potential to be top 6 if he had qualified a bit better and kept out of trouble early on. So there were certain signs in Indonesia that Agius was to his best. It's been quite up and down, hasn't it, in the second part of the year for the Australian. There's been some highs, that excellent 5th place Misano, 1 or 2 race weekends where it really, 1 or 2 Sundays where it really hasn't gone to plan. I'm hoping that just be a nice clean weekend. And speaking to him, do a bit of work for the magazine Australian Motorcycle News. Speaking to Senna ahead of this race weekend, and he was reminiscing of that performance last year, and he was saying that when he qualified better, he thought he had maybe the speed to go with the likes of Aldeguer and Knet up at the front. So Saturday will be a very, very important day for the number 81. Showing just now that he's well up for his home Grand Prix here this weekend. Another fastest time from ages.
Kevin Morero, though, also going very, very quickly early on in this session. Manu Gonzalez has now got up and running. He's on the board now, although down in 25th. Aaron Canet is in the process at the moment on his out lap of starting his first run of the morning and of the weekend. Morera into the 32s now, 32.8 for him. So it's Aegis, Arbolino, Morera. You've got 1, 2, 3. Phillip Salax for Marvinia Sport from Adrian Puertas and Ethan Guevara, who we haven't spoken much about. We haven't seen him on screen yet in this session, but of course arrives here on the back of his best ever Moto2 result, second place in the Indonesian Grand Prix. Here are Dixon and Gonzalez, who we've already seen go toe-to-toe in the early part of this season back in Argentina, a battle that Big Dixon went on to win. And Gonzalez, one of the riders perhaps at the top of the list this weekend. We're hoping that we get predominantly dry conditions.
There's nothing worse than inch half and half conditions when you're fighting for a championship. And Gonzalez will be very aware of that, and understandably he took a conservative approach at the start of the session, but he's now coming into it. Fourth fastest time for Gonzalez, but some 0.6 per second off his teammate still. Aegis is just continuing to get faster and faster as he comes around this fabulous final left-hander turn 12. Just a little bit out of shape there as he comes onto the front straight. Line is another fastest time of 32.1, so we're getting somewhere in the region of the all-time lap record in the Moto2 class. It is Aaron Canet's 130.8 from last year. As we see, Lopez has had a crash midway through this session. Field last year was weather afflicted as well, and had we had perfect conditions all through the weekend, I think that 130.8 would have been much faster. So good conditions this afternoon. And tomorrow, perhaps we could see a lap in the 1 minute 29s. There is Alonso Lopez, who's had a crash down at Siberia, turn number 6.
The distance from where we are down at turn 4, the way out of the corner, the rear stepping round for Alonso Lopez. The bike followed him as well. And understand Luca Foscascoro with plenty of concern on his face. We spoke of Alonso Lopez at the start of the session as something of a circuit specialist when he performed magic tricks, both literally and figuratively, after he won the Grand Prix here a couple of years ago, despite a long lap penalty. Exactly the most auspicious of starts for Alonso Lopez, who's now, as you can see, bottom left corner of your screen, trying to wheel his Boscascoro out of harm's way.
Like Kiko, you've got your figurative in there, thankfully. Yeah, and I think he is still the only rider in Grand Prix history to take a long lap penalty in the lead of a race and to come out of the long lap penalty in the lead of a race.
Took it 1 lap 3, 4, was it? He knew he had the long lap penalty before the race even started, because he crashed into Chelsea Vietti, I think it was, in practice earlier on in that weekend. Didn't bother him at all, did it? By the time he won the Grand Prix on the Sunday. Foscascoro won 2 of the last 3 Australian Grand Prix. Would have won the other one. Tony Arbolino, of course, not taking advantage of some wet weather in 2023, a weekend which Fabien Aldeguer was dominating until it rained in the Grand Prix. Just prior to that, we had a trio of KTM wins, 2019, 18 and 17. So you have to go all the way back to 2016, actually, 9 years ago, the last time a Calix rider won this Grand Prix.
That is a crash from Manu Gonzalez, the championship leader. That is not an ideal start for Manu Gas, who's crashed out in sector number 3. It looks as though it's been a fast one. It is the Haitian, turn number 8. Goodness me, and look at that, he's lost the front through there. Well over 100 miles an hour. And that is a rapid barrel roll through the gravel there for Manu. You can see he took a bit of an impact on his head, but thankfully he's up and walking away. Goodness me. We're talking about Gonzalez happened to come out swinging here this weekend. It's undeniably going to take some of the wind out of his sails.
To speed through that corner, thick end of 200 kilometers an hour, 125 miles an hour through the hay shed there for Manu Gonzalez. You see the scuffs to the back of his leathers there. Certainly caught his attention. Just a slight correction to what I said moments ago. You have to go back to 2016 for the last time a dry Grand Prix here was won by a Calix rider. Tony Arbolino with his snorkel on, did win this race here 2 years ago on board an Mark VDS Calex. But Manu Gonzalez, it'll be 4 laps to his name in this session. Yes, the first half of the session was a bit affected with the large damp patches on the racetrack, but a rider who never really lacks confidence, but even Manu Gonzalez's confidence will have taken a bit of a kick after that one.
Yeah, his team have been saying all year how unflappable he is, but that is going to be put to the absolute test, isn't it, with what's happened in the last 2 weeks there. You can see he's just getting the okay from some of the medical officials at the side of the track, and the team know that that is pretty much his session over. Here is a replay as he pitches into the right-hander through the hay shed. The front just goes there. It's maybe a little bit wide, ever so slightly offline. And look at the consequences that he's had to face after that. The nasty old roll through the gravel. And thankfully, it looks as though he's given the A-OK medical officials at the side of the track. Terrible start to the weekend, you would have to say, for Manu Gonzalez.
Diogo Moreira, his chief rival, is flying at the moment out there on a largely dry racetrack now, although it's still a slightly troublesome one. And as we saw around about 10-15 minutes ago with the graphic on your screen, track temperature still very, very low, not even 20 degrees of track temperature out there at the moment. Aegis now, he's giving the intact squad some positive news. A 31.5 for him now puts him 0.6 of a second clear of Tony Arbolino. So Aegis now within 3/4 of a second of the all-time lap record around this Phillip Island circuit. Here comes Moreira then, who gets down to a 1:32 exactly into second place as he now picks up Danny Munoz on the way into Doon Corner.
So Moreira will be very, very pleased with this. We don't usually see this kind of speed from the Brazilian this early into a race weekend. Looks to build his way up. The best of him around Saturday. Quite ominous, you would say, for the opposition, for Moreira to be this high up in FP1 so far. Just behind Phillip Salas comes down into turn number 4. It's a nice clean pass on that occasion. Aegis is head and shoulders above everyone in this session. Moreira, the only rider within the second of the home start. And then he is more than 4/10 off and shots into that Italtrans box. You can see there Roberto Brivio with the glasses on the right of the screen. Looking on. Implacably to read the Italian, but inside the confidence will be building that the championship really is achievable this year.
Confidence we're building at the Fantic squad too, with Aaron Kinnett, who's currently in 5th place in this session. He's found a 1:32.168. This afternoon's practice session is going to be such a key one for Kinnett. Of course, in the last 2 Friday afternoon practice sessions, Kinnett has crashed and left himself beside the top 14 and having to go through qualifying 1, which has really kicked off a weekend of pain for Kinnett until the Sunday in Indonesia, at least, where he's qualified outside the top 20. Only got a point on the board in Japan when he came through to 15th place. So a much more spirited and successful comeback for Kinnett a couple of weeks ago in Indonesia. Here is the 44. I do like to take a trip to social media corner whenever we discuss Aaron Kinnett in these Moto2 sessions, and he did say on his social media after the Indonesian Grand Prix, so they were starting a long way behind, but as the real Aaron Kinnett would say, what does that matter? Absolutely right in the end to listen to the real Aaron Kinnett, who's now into 3rd place.
The real Aaron Kinnett looks as though he's back after a couple of weekends in the wilderness. Looked as though the championship fight was just going to completely fizzle out, didn't it? Through a couple of those Asian lines in Japan and Indonesia, but swinging on race day in Mandalika. As we see, Danny Munoz is having some mechanical issues. He's basically slowing to a halt as he comes down the main straight. Not quite right with that IO machine.
So he's really that one-way pit lanes, trying to get himself back to the box. 5.5 minutes still remaining of this session, but of course it's going to be a bit of a post-mortem on that machine before he's allowed to go back out again. Just at the moment in this session, can't find his name on the screen. 23rd place at the moment for him on a 1:34.95. Plus Alonso Lopez at the back of the field with 1 time lap to his name before he crashed up at Siberia.
I said earlier in this broadcast, as we see the sorry picture of Manu Gonzalez is, I'd say totaled machine, but certainly very damaged intact GP bike. in the box. It's going to require quite a bit of work during the lunch break to make sure it's up and okay for practice this afternoon. Saying earlier on, why this has been such a brilliant and happy hunting ground for the Boscoscuro chassis years gone by. Aldeguer really should have had 3 victories from the last 3 years. He showed that kind of potential in each of the 3 Grand Prix. In the end, he only won once here in Moto2. Alonso Lopez did so the other time. Had not been for that kind of storm that we had in 2023, I think Aldeguer would have cleaned up that year as well.
Arbolino said, didn't he, in Parker, mate, this was your weekend for me.
Yeah, exactly. But slightly surprising then to only see what 2 Boscoscuro machines in the top 6. Jake Dixon currently 3rd. And then we have Ethan Guevara 6th. Tony Arbolino in 7th as well. But we're not seeing that kind of domination that we had seen from Boscoscuro in previous years, where they were clearly a step ahead of the Calex. But then Calex have clearly made such a big step forward in 2025 that it's not such a surprise.
Of course, the Constructors' Champion once again are Calex for the 13th time in Moto2. The groups there of David Alonso's into 5th place. Arbolino continuing to lead the Boscoscuro Challenge early on in 3rd place. Arbolino now firmly into the 131s. We've now got the top 7 riders all in the 131s, down to this man, Aaron Canet, in 7th place. 7 could be about to become 3rd or 4th here for Canet as we follow him through the fearsome final corner, taking in 4th gear on these Moto2 machines, around 100 miles an hour, 160 k's through turn 12, and Canet now climbs over the crest as we go down the Gardner Straight and is into the top 3 now on the 131.7.
Canet does say that he loves these high-speed, fast and flowing tracks, and if you look at this year, the faster tracks that we've gone to, the likes of Qatar where he won, Silverstone where he was in the victory battle up until the final lap, Assen where he narrowly missed out on victory as well, to Diogo Moreira on the final lap, and we've gone to some of the faster layouts this season. Canet has normally been there or thereabouts, so good to see him in the mix on Friday morning here. See Tony Arbolino looking a lot more like his old self as well. Something has clicked for the number 14 in recent weeks. He was saying coming into this weekend that right arm, which had been causing him so many problems in the first 2/3 of this season, he then had that operated on to alleviate some arm pump before the Japanese Grand Prix. He said that arm is feeling back to full strength, so we are seeing a full strength Tony Arbolino here this weekend for the first time in some time.
Lights a fire under you than seeing your younger teammate take a career best 2nd place last time out. We'll no doubt get a chance to discuss Guevara with his fine performance in Indonesia later on in practice. Guevara currently in 9th place in this session. Taking a look at what happened to 2022 Australian Grand Prix winner Alonso Lopez as the rear spat him out over the top, coming out of Siberia, who disappears out of view behind the trees with a Boscoscuro following in for the journey.
Not sure if he had maybe some gravel come up underneath his helmet. It looked as though he was suffering from 1 or 2 scrapes to his chin or potentially to his mouth. So let's hope the Alonso is okay and ready to go again when practice rolls around this afternoon. That didn't improve on that last lap. But, I'll still be happy to be sitting in 5th. It's great to see David Alonso back up in the mix after his very painful end, the Indonesian Grand Prix. Bang to the head and to the mouth. That horrible crash by Saudi coming out of the penultimate turn in the Mandalika circuit. We could well see a Boscoscuro coming up to the top of the order at the end of this session.
We've got the 2nd Boscoscuro for Speed RS down right outside our commentary box window. Luca Boscoscuro hasn't seen it yet, but his morning has got even worse. Alonso Lopez down already at Siberia, and right outside our commentary box window, Celestino Vietti is trudging away from a crash down at Miller Corner and was walking right towards us actually through the long lap penalty loop. There is now confirmation on your screens. Both of the Speed RS Boscoscuros down on this Friday morning.
A rough start then for the Speed RS squad, and here's what happened to Celestino Vietti. It went so early. Well, I don't know what to say about Celestino after that brilliant weekend at home at Misano. A bit pear-shaped, hasn't it? 2 non-scores on the bounce here, and you were pointing out earlier, Rose, that Vietti hasn't actually scored a single point since his first visit here, when he was actually on the podium in just his 2nd ever race as Grand Prix rider.
back in Moto3 in 2018. He's not had an awful lot of luck since then. Of course, he didn't even race here last year. He crashed in this very session. Free practice on the Friday morning in very different conditions and fractured his shoulder. Of course, caused him to take a little bit of time off. We then saw him take an extraordinary victory not long after that. Of course, when he won in Malaysia. Hasn't necessarily been the best of venues for Chelsea and Vietti since that incredible first visit here some 7 years ago. We're following Alonso then through the final corner. I think he's going to end this morning session in second place. Both he and Jake Dixon, as we're watching Vietti's crash, have gone ahead of Diogo Moreira now, so we're down to a 31.3 for Dixon. Can say about David Alonso over perhaps the crash in the last Grand Prix in Indonesia and the painful end to his afternoon. That would appear to have got a grip of some of his qualifying woes that we saw him suffering from early on in his Moto2 adventures. Alonso here on the back of back-to-back front row starts.
Hasn't quite managed to capitalise on those good qualifying positions just yet, but been a good place for him in years gone by. Alonso, he had many places, one of the 14 race circuits where he won, of course, in his victorious Moto3 campaign last year. As we see, sorry sight, Gonzalez's bike being stripped down. It's going to have to be rebuilt before practice. Gonzalez has had a very unhappy start here to Australia. I guess the positive is that he was walking away in that massive crash at well over 100 miles an hour through the Hayshed corner, but he ends this session down in 20 seconds. He used the first part of practice today to rebuild his confidence after this.
He has taken a trip to the medical centre, as you can just about read at the top of your screens. A great surprise in a crash of that nature. We did see him walking away though from that crash, so I hope that Gonzalez has gone to the medical centre of his own accord for a precautionary check. And we hope to see him back on our track this afternoon. Practice, which is going to be a crucial session in two respects, isn't it, for Gonzalez? Not just to rebuild that confidence, but also, of course, Q2 places already on the line this afternoon, and his two chief title rivals both clearly on the pace early on here in Australia. Moreira third, and Aaron Canet up in sixth.
Yeah, I would say everyone will be at the timing screens a little concerned at Diogo Moreira being this fast, this early in a race weekend. That previously he normally likes to build his way into the Grand Prix, but third fastest in FP1 is very promising as well. But Jake Dixon was the fastest off the lot. Did say yesterday that he fancied his chances this weekend for such a brilliant record here. Jake has never been a slouch around these high-speed curves. Dixon taking the fastest time, and yeah, we'll be looking to add to his two victories so far, 2025 on Sunday.
And Alonso then second quickest on a 31.4 this morning from Moreira. He just did take fourth place in the end for Australia. We're next up as we give you now a full rundown of how this free practice one session concluded. Dramatic one for the World Championship contenders. Jake Dixon fastest from David Alonso and Diogo Moreira. Then arranged led for much of the session. He was one of the first to go onto slicks, fourth ahead of Tony Arbolino and Aaron Canet. Danny Holgado, spoken about much this morning, but he was seventh ahead of Adrian Huertas, Mario Aggi and Ethan Guevara. Bouncers, Robert Sasaki and Salax next up ahead of Darren Binder, Marcos Ramirez and Alberto Reinas. Chelsea and Vietti, one of two Spiel RS riders to crash, 18th there, Colin Vaya and Ivan Ortola. Zonta van den Gorbo 21st, ahead of the championship leader Manu Gonzalez, who's gone to the medical centre after that big crash at the Hayshed. Navarro, Hoyt, Munoz, Cooney and Lopez, who also fell at Alex's Screech, as we saw with smoke coming out of the exhaust of his forward machine, did not set a time. Oh, dramatic morning that was. The championship leader on the floor. Dixon, though, on top for Mark BDS in this first Moto2 session on Phillip Island. Coming up next, though, we begin our MotoGP weekend with free practice one.
MotoGP's Asia Pacific Tour has reached its most southerly point with the Australian Grand Prix coming from the fierce and Phillip Island track south of Melbourne. Home to idyllic beaches with captivating coastlines and a unique wildlife, its tiny island sanctuary provides the world's best ride with one of the toughest challenges of the season. We're underway in round 19. Next live, it's time, MotoGP. What more can you say about this magnificent, phenomenal Phillip Island circuit? 4.44 kilometres in length, just over 2.75 miles. Only 12 corners, 5 right, 7 of them left, but they all pose a real tricky challenge around this magnificent circuit. 900 metres is the Gardner Straight, that's just over half a mile in length. Good overtaking opportunity as you slipstream towards the Doohan corner. So many iconic corner lanes here as well. Stoner corner, turn 3, turn 12. That's real tyre punishing territory, isn't it? Here at the Australian Grand Prix. Good morning and welcome back to Australia. Welcome back to Phillip Island as we begin our coverage in MotoGP of round 19 in the 2025 MotoGP World Championship. A record-breaking 22-round season is starting to take its toll a little bit, isn't it, on some of our star-studded lineup. Whole front row of the grid from last year's Australian Grand Prix. Sadly, not with us here this weekend. Jorge Martin, well, we knew he was going to be sidelined on the factory at Aprilia after his nasty crash with his teammate Marco Bezzecchi on the first corner of the sprint at the Japanese Grand Prix, which already seems like a long, long time ago, doesn't it? At the start of the Asia Pacific Tour. Of course, we knew we were going to be missing Maverick Vinales as well on the Rebel KTM Tech 3 machine. Maverick still struggling, recovering from that nasty left shoulder injury he suffered at the Sachsenring in Germany all the way back in the summer. Mo Vinales here this weekend. Mo Vinales also in Sepang next week. But the biggest name on what's an unfortunately increasing casualty list, well, it's the newly crowned world champion, Marc Marquez, the factory Ducati star, potentially missing for the remainder of the 2025 season. Of course, he was involved in that first lap incident a couple of weeks ago in Mandalika with Marco Bezzecchi. Fracture to the shoulder blades, which Mark was hoping would not require surgery. It's not going to require any intervention. Sadly, that was not the case. Under knife once again was Mark earlier on this week. Sidelined for Australia and definitely for Malaysia, most likely Portimao as well. Doubts about whether we will see the new world champion again this season. As an correct though, here this weekend is Marco Bezzecchi. Unfortunately, does have a double long lap coming his way in the Grand Prix here on Sunday after that collision with Marc Marquez over in Indonesia. Talking you through all of this morning's action here down under. Matt Burton Lewis will be in the commentary box. Jack Appleyard down in what is a pretty blustery pit lane right now. And I'm delighted to say we are joined by a very, very special guest, Chris Gabulin, World Supersport champion, World Superbike race winner, MotoGP race winner. Chris, this was a big talking point, of course, a couple of weeks ago over in Mandalika. So unfortunate to see Mark, 7 days after winning the World Championship, sidelined once again through injury.
I know, and his season's been so impressive watching from the outside, and with you how important it is to wrap up a championship. That's it's so disappointing because we wanted to see other fans down here racing. Than originally expected, and it's a shame to see, but yeah, I'm disappointed for Mark. That shoulder's been through a lot already, but good to see this guy on the bike and getting a go. Michele Pira obviously in the Ducati's test rider for a long time. They're stalwart, I guess you could say, and